Thank y'all. Good afternoon. Appreciate y'all being here. After I give some opening remarks, I'll be followed by Senator Danny Martini. Then we'll have Secretary Jim LeBlanc from the Department of Corrections. We'll have Pete Adams from the Louisiana District Attorneys Association. And then we'll have Walt Leger, the Speaker Pro Tem of the House of Representatives. Obviously, we're here today to talk about the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Task Force and the package of legislation that came out of that task force. And I'm proud to stand here today with colleagues and friends, the folks who are here, folks in the room, to announce a criminal justice reinvestment package that now I believe is in its final form. After a lot of negotiations, a lot of meetings, a lot of hard work, we have a compromise package of bills. And I want to personally thank Director Pete Adams, if I can find you, there you are, from Louisiana District Attorneys Association, Mike Renazza, who leads the Louisiana Sheriff's Association, as well as a number of individuals who worked extremely hard within those organizations. For example, District Attorney Bo Dewey, who was also a member of the task force, Assistant DA Bobby Odney, District Attorney Thor Moore from here in Baton Rouge, District Attorney Ricky Babin, District Attorney Steve Tew. We had Sheriff Mike Cass from West Baton Rouge and Sheriff Craig Weber from Lafourche Parish, and many, many others. I also want to thank the legislators who worked so diligently on these bills, and many of them are here today as well. They spent countless hours with my staff and the bill sponsors reviewing the justice reinvestment legislation and coming to agreement on key changes that resolve their concerns. This compromise package contains smart, aggressive reforms that will certainly improve public safety, hold people accountable for criminal behavior, and reduce our state prison population by at least 10% over the next decade. The projected cost savings is 87% of the original package that was introduced by the Justice Reinvestment Task Force. That's $262 million saved over the next decade. We're also committed to reinvest more of the savings, 70% rather than 50%. If we achieve the savings we're projecting, that puts a reinvestment amount at an estimated $184 million over the next decade. Investments that will expand prison alternatives, fund programs in jails and in the community that reduce reoffending, and build up services that support victims of crime. So what's in the reform package? Well, we're making smart sentencing reforms, and that means eliminating some mandatory minimums, making more people eligible for probation and drug court, bringing our laws for drug and property crimes in line with other states, reducing habitual offender penalties, and eliminating life sentences for repeat nonviolent crimes. We're expanding the use of parole and good time and giving people more opportunities to earn time off of prison terms for participating in treatment and programming. We're also strengthening community supervision by using evidence-based sanctions and incentives, focusing supervision on the highest risk period of time, clearing away barriers to success that pile on debt beyond a person's means or that make it harder to get and keep a job, and much more. As you all know, the United States leads the world in imprisonment, and Louisiana locks people up at a rate nearly twice the national average. That's why we have the highest incarceration rate in the country. It is not because we have the most crime. Our crime rates are similar to most other states in the South. It's because of our policy decisions, the laws we put on the books, ratcheting up prison terms for all sorts of offenses. I know we can get more public safety bang for the buck. We have to. We're hemorrhaging money now in a system with a very high failure rate, and every failure means a new crime victim. The stakes are just too high. Dozens of other states have adopted targeted reforms like these that have driven down incarceration and crime. And I'm confident we're going to do the same. And I'm also confident that what we have been doing simply isn't working, and it's time to make a positive change, an evidence-based change. The District Attorneys Association and Sheriff's Association have been a vital part of this reform effort. They participated in the Justice Reinvestment Task Force, and they worked closely with the legislature and my office to find a way to make this reform package work. I'm grateful for their partnership, their expertise, and their brainpower on this incredibly important issue. And I'm proud to stand with these folks today to announce this compromise package. I'm going to be followed by Senator Danny Martini, and at the end of Representative Walt Leger's comments, then we will certainly take questions. Danny?
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this effort. I've been here going on 23 years, and I've seen a pattern of conduct involving myself and a lot of other legislators, where we continue, every year we come up here, we create crimes, the next year we enhance the penalties, then we come with mandatory minimums, and then we come with truth in sentencing, and we take away good time, and then we tell Secretary LeBlanc, you handle them. And then when we call people in, and we look at them, and we call, and this is the 5th time that I've been up here in this building since we got sworn in last January. And every year, we're short of money. And we call in all these government agencies, and we look at what they do, and we see how we can cut. We keep cutting, we keep cutting, we cutting. Well, today, I'm going to call on my colleagues to do something that they haven't done, that we haven't done. And I consider myself part of the problem too, because I've been here. And that's to turn around and take a look at what we do and grade our paper. Because we cannot continue to do what we've been doing and survive. There are people, we can't fund TOPS, we can't fund higher ed, we can't fund medical services. But nobody ever looks at corrections. And I'm very proud to say that due to the efforts of the Pew Charitable Trust and the cooperation of the sheriffs and the DAs and the governor's office, we've been able to take a hard look at what we do. And believe me, I'm not blaming the DAs or the sheriffs. We've given them the tools to lock people up. We have the same crime rate as South Carolina, yet we incarcerate it 2 to 3 times that we do, and that they do. And when we tell Secretary LeBlanc to make cuts, he can't cut people out of jail, so what does he do? He cuts programs. And so nonviolent people who are in jail, who might have the opportunity to avail themselves of some of these programs to maybe better themselves and get out a little earlier, are no longer able to do that. They put bad and good people in jail, and we basically tell them, it doesn't matter whether you're good or bad. And when you get out, we're probably going to, well, hopefully you'll be good, but we can't offer you anything because we don't have the money. This is a first step, but a giant step, in my opinion, in trying to turn this thing around. We don't have to be the incarceration capital of the world. We don't have to incarcerate it 2 to 3 times. And we surely don't have to we need to make sure, and I believe the governor has done this, and the DAs and the sheriff, the violent people need to stay in jail. But we need to increase our efforts to make sure that when someone goes in and does their time and they get out, that they're probably not going to be violent when they get out, because then they'll come right back in. I think 1 out of 3 comes back within the 3 years after they get out. So this is very important. These are the 3 bills that I'm handling on the Senate floor this afternoon are very important. I'll call them first steps. We've had some other bills that come up. But I think it's so important that we need to take a hard look at ourselves and say, you know what, rather than telling all these government agencies, you need to change the way you do business, it's time for us to focus on the criminal justice system and make sure that we're doing it in an efficient way that makes sure that bad people stay in jail and good people have a chance to rehabilitate themselves and get out and be productive citizens. And we need to give Secretary LeBlanc and the governor's office those tools. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, everybody. You know, I just want to mention that, you know, we still have a ways to go. Obviously, we have the Senate and the House side. And I don't want to forget about our House bills because we have some work to do there, which will be either tomorrow or Thursday. But, you know, in my opinion, this is the biggest step. I've been in this business a long time, and from my standpoint, this is the biggest step that this state has ever taken in our history to move us forward and getting us out of that hole of being the highest incarceration rate in the world. And, you know, the governor really put it in perspective in his comments. And I want to again thank Pew. As we know and have said, this is the most, in our history, we've never had the kind of data-driven criminal justice research that we've done over the last year. When this started a year ago, It's kind of a dream to be standing here today, actually. We have compromise here, but again, I think it's a big step. As chair of the task force, I want to take this opportunity to thank the task force members, to thank our community partners, to thank our chambers, our business community, thank our judges, our DAs, our sheriffs. This is a collaborative effort, and this kind of is a reflection of it working together. This is what can be accomplished for our state. And as the governor mentioned, we're faced with budget cuts this year, and we don't have anywhere to go. I mean, these are the kind of things, if we don't make this kind of step in the right direction, we're faced with some very hard choices to make in the long run. I want to mention this, and on a DA standpoint, and working with this, and I want to thank Pete and the DAs. There's a part of this with the lifers. There's about 100, probably 30, 40 lifers that, when they were sentenced in the 70s, they had life with parole. They're still in this bill, and it's a fairness issue because when they were sentenced, they had life with parole, and they don't today. I just again want to thank Pete and the DAs for working with us on that. And I think this is a good example of the kind of work that can be accomplished, hopefully set good examples for what can be accomplished down the road for our state. And lastly, the justice reinvestment part of this, for me, is certainly critical, and Representative Leger's bill that we'll be working on this week. We've had and had concerns when we went through the Office of Juvenile Justice with the Missouri model, and the money didn't get put in place. But we have a governor, we have a group of people, administration that's behind this. We feel like we have a good bill that will help us move this money in the right direction, and we are including OJJ in the reinvestment side of this, which I think is important to start eliminating that pipeline from our juvenile facilities into the adult facilities, and I think that's a key component of what we are trying to accomplish in this endeavor. So again, I want to thank the task force members, thank everybody and the governor for being a part of this.
First of all, I want to thank the governor and his staff, the secretary and his staff, and the key legislative leaders for working with the district attorneys to come up with something that we can make progress on and that protects the safety of the citizens of Louisiana. It's a balance, and I believe that what we have is a good product before us. The district attorneys throughout this process have been criticized by some as being opposed to all change, all of justice reform and all of sentencing reform, and it's just not true. From the very beginning, we participated in the task force. Even before the task force was formed, we worked with the Smart on Crime folks and reformers to pass more than 30 pieces of legislation similar to what we're doing today. Maybe not as broad in scope, but similar. And the results have been a 9% reduction in our incarceration rate. Being number one in the world in incarceration rate is not something we're proud of as DAs. And we want to do something about that, but we wanted to do it in a manner that was responsible and that protected public safety. And we think what we've done with this compromise is achieve that balance. We told folks in the beginning that we thought we needed to focus on nonviolent crime. We think that the original package had a number of provisions that were contrary to that principle. We think that what we've done now is focus on nonviolent crime. But I do want to mention the exception that Secretary LeBlanc mentioned just a moment ago. There's a class of lifers who do not have an opportunity for parole, and they've been in 2019, all of them will have been in at least 40 years. And at one point in time, they had 40-year parole eligibility. And our district attorneys met, and as ministers of justice, we felt compelled not to oppose that being in the package. We just think it's fair that they should have parole eligibility at 40 years. They were once promised that. The law, by technicalities, deprived them of that. And we believe, as ministers of justice, we cannot, in good conscience, oppose that. So it is in the package. It is an exception to our violent and sex offender exception to the rule. I commend the package to you. I think it's reasonable. We are going to support the package. And I think that if it proves to be effective, if we're actually able to reinvest money into services, we can consider going forward further in future years. But again, thank you to all of you who work with us.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you, Mr. Adams. And I appreciate where we find ourselves today. This is a moment in the history of the state of Louisiana where I think we can clearly say that we're shifting from legislating by anecdote to legislating by data and research. And that's what this has always been about to me. Over the course of the last almost decade of service here, this has been something that has driven me to continue to seek solutions to the challenges that face us. We could not have put together such an excellent task force report without the collaboration of the district attorneys, without the collaboration of the governor's office, the Department of Corrections, the sheriffs, the Supreme Court, the faith-based community, the business community. It required everyone coming together to put this task force report together in the first place. Now, this building is driven by a thing called votes. And so many of us would have liked to have gotten the entire package done, 100% of it. But in order to pass meaningful legislation, you have to have the votes necessary to do that. And so that's why countless hours have been spent by legislators, including Representative Joe Marino, who's been a huge asset in moving through some of these complicated issues, as well as district attorneys and other professionals. 87% is a huge accomplishment. Hundreds of millions of dollars saved, tens of millions of dollars that will be reinvested to make the quality of life of people of this state better. All of our priorities, every person here has a priority for public safety. And we've always looked at reform in that light. But we also recognize that what we've been doing hasn't been working, it hasn't made us safer. And so the reforms that we put in place over the next several weeks, clearly, based on evidence and data, will give us an opportunity to have a safer state, to have a state that spends public safety dollars more appropriately and reduces the expenditure on things that take away from our society and invest it instead in things that build our society up. So I thank everyone that has been a part of this for their leadership, because without everyone pulling in the same direction, we simply just don't get there. And so I wish the best to Senator Martini on the Senate floor today, and look forward to bringing our bills forward over the next couple of days in the House and finishing up this session. So again, thank you.
Okay, with that, we're going to take questions now. I do want to let you know that members of the staff will be staying to meet with you all, and they have handouts that explain the detail of the various legislative instruments, and they will be here to discuss those with you and answer any questions. And there was some question about whether I got the amount right. The projected cost savings is 87% of the original package that was introduced by the task force. So that's a total savings of $262 million over the next decade. But when we reinvest at least 70% of that, that's an estimated $184 million that will be reinvested over that same decade of time. So with that, we will take questions. And if you would, when you ask the question, just if you ask them for a specific person, just let us know. Yes, sir.
Not on criminal justice reform, but I would like to know if you plan to veto or sign the Confederate monument.
I'm happy to get to that question after the criminal justice questions. The Senate went into session about 3 minutes ago. We need to take those questions, and then I'm going to stay for a few minutes after. I'm happy to call on you. I don't see a press credential, and if I do that, I'm going to get in trouble with the press. Yes, sir.
Governor, give us an idea of what kind of offenders or inmates will be impacted by these changes.
Well, first of all, almost every offender who is at issue with respect to a nonviolent crime, whether it's a property crime or a low-level crime, will be benefited from this. But in terms of the reinvestment, everybody will benefit, because 95% of the people in prison are going to get out. And so when we reinvest money into the programs necessary that reentry is successful, they all benefit, whether it's from education, skills training, with mental illness treatments or addiction disorder treatments. Everybody's going to benefit from that, and including society as a whole, because every successful reentry means fewer victims of crime. And that's where we've been falling short. And I'm certainly happy to let somebody else give another shot at that answer.
I would add that I think some of the key reforms that are going to be implemented have been addressed briefly, but I think major sentencing reform as it relates to drug crimes and property crimes, as well as reform on nonviolent offenders and how their convictions interact with the habitual offender law are huge contributors to the success of the package over time. We knew that at the outset that the incarceration rate was being driven largely by nonviolent offenders, and so being able to address the crimes that were driving the incarceration rate was one of the primary goals, and it will be one of the primary accomplishments.
One thing, the only thing I would add to that is medical furlough is in the bill which exempts first-degree murder, but it does expand it. If you are medically, in other words, you go through a process to get a furlough medically, which I think from a cost standpoint has an impact, from our standpoint anyway.
Let me ask about the abolition of the death penalty bill that Senator Dan Plater has. Was that brought up in these negotiations at all?
No, and that question would be better asked either of him or Representative Terry Landrieu, who has the bill on the House side. But that was never part of either the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Task Force work or the package of bills that we put together for this session. Yes, ma'am.
In terms of the reinvestment, the $184 million, is there a breakdown of where that's going yet, and who makes the decision about where that goes?
Well,
How that's spent?
it is in, the reinvestment portion is in a bill that Representative Leger has, and he will be presenting that bill tomorrow or Thursday, and I'm going to let him talk to you about it. But there is no doubt that we have to be disciplined, we have to be responsible, because going forward, we have to honor the commitment we made to reinvest this savings. If all we want to do is pocket the savings, we will not be successful to the degree that we need to be successful to make sure that all the programming, for example, is available to the inmates to allow for successful reentry into the civilian population. But Juan, if you would come and
I
address
understand. I guess maybe Representative Leger can answer this. At this point, if you guys have a deal, I'm assuming you talked about how we're actually going to spend that money, and is there a process for?
Sure, it's laid out specifically in the bill. 30% of the savings are to be reinvested through the Department of Corrections on programming in the Department of Corrections related to substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, and otherwise. 20% of the savings is to be invested in the form of grants to local government entities, meaning sheriff's offices or district attorney's offices or other community partners, to offer similar services, but also to offer services related to job training, vocational training, and otherwise. And the remaining 50% is also to deal with victim services and trauma-informed care and counseling for victims. The remaining 50% also Department of Corrections to be directed towards the economic development piece or the workforce piece, which is going to be reentry, job training, and other programs. But largely administered and overseen by the Department of Corrections and by the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement.
So I guess, I'm sorry if I'm not being clear, is there gonna be like an administrative process, or is this just Secretary LeBlanc deciding, so-and-so sheriff gets a piece of this?
Again, the bill says that the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement, along with the Department of Corrections, and in collaboration with other entities, will be developing the way to distribute those funds.
Okay, but that hasn't been worked out yet?
Go ahead.
So, I mentioned yesterday to the governor in a cabinet meeting, and it's the first time he's heard it, but we're working on a 5-year plan, and which will be available, and that we've been, in touch with the sheriffs, in touch with the Supreme Court, in touch with the DAs, and how we go about investing that money over the next 5 years. And so, still some questions to be answered in that regard, but I think Representative Leger pretty much hit on the points on where that money will go into. We know we need programs and services out there in our communities, in particular in our communities, that's available to the DAs so they can take advantage of that. But we are working on a 5-year plan.
Yes, ma'am.
The 87% savings that you're still calculating, does that assume the felony class system will be implemented, or is that absent of that? And how important is the felony class system? Do you still plan on attacking that next year?
We do, but the 87% is not premised upon anything beyond the legislative package that will be voted on this year. And so it's not dependent upon us doing something next year, although with the work that we've already done this year and the continuing collaboration with the sheriffs and the district attorneys in particular, we do intend to revamp that systemization, if you will, of crimes. Yes?
Are either of the bills to address juvenile lifetime parole part of this?
They are not part of the package, and now they come up in discussion quite often, but they are not part of this package. And if you remember, there was a bill that addressed this last year, and it died on the calendar on the last day, I think for totally unforeseen and reasons unrelated to the bill itself. But there is a bill that's moving through that I believe we have to push across the goal line this year, not just because I want to do it, but the Supreme Court has told us we have to do it. Anything else?
I got a quick question. If you could, why are criminal defense attorneys, the district DA's office behind this at this point? What makes this package so likable for DAs across the state?
Well, likable is an interesting term. We realize that something needs to be done. And like I said, being number one is not something that anybody should be proud of when it comes to incarceration. But we realize that something needs to be done. And we trust that with reinvestment, that the changes that we are proposing and that we're supporting will make a difference in our incarceration rate and save some money and perhaps build up some services that in the future will reduce the rate of incarceration. The problem now is that there are not a lot of choices. If you get somebody who is a career criminal, who has a mental health problem or a drug problem, and there's no treatment facilities, there's no ability to treat that illness, there's no slots in drug court, there's not a lot you can do with that person except send them off for incarceration or risk the community's public safety. So we're hoping that with these changes, we can generate some savings, build up these services, and lower our incarceration rate safely. That's why we're behind it.
All right, one last question.
Your hand is up.
Does anyone have any concerns? I know the DA sort of raised the specter of this being a multi-object bill, which would make it not constitutional. Do you have that concern?
Well, first, it's not a single bill. It's at least 6
They
different
raised the
bills.
concern about a couple of them being multi-object bills.
That was before we had a full compromise. They're not concerned anymore. I really don't think we have that problem. I mean, we'll take another look at it, but if we were trying to do this with one omnibus bill, I think that's potentially a problem. But I will tell you, ever since the Supreme Court's ruling in part of the education reform package, that's less of a concern from the legal.
Is that not a concern for the DA?
That statement was made when we were reserving all options. I believe the compromise, I think the compromise has caused us to withdraw that option.
All right, thank you. I do want to thank, we have Gene Mills here, who served on the task force. And Gene, I apologize, I didn't see you earlier and didn't mention you, but he also served on the task force. At this point, we're going to excuse everybody. I know you've got work to do in the House and in the Senate, but thank you all very much. I'll give you a few seconds to depart. And again, we're going to have staff members stand at the end of the press conference to specifically answer detailed questions and give handouts that contain a lot of detailed information about the legislative package. Okay, yes, sir.
My question from earlier, does he intend to veto or sign the Confederate money and bill against your desk?
Well, as you know, I'm going to talk about that later. Mark, thank you for the question. As you know, the bill has made it through about half of the legislative process, so we have to see what happens with the other half, and if it makes it to my desk, and if so, what shape it's in. I will tell you that the bill is problematic to me for a number of reasons, one of which is just a real-world practical concern. You know, for example, to require a vote of people before any of these, not just statues or plaques or monuments, but any structure can be altered or moved is a real problem. You know, for example, Alex Box Stadium was torn down and moved recently. It's named for a war hero. Are we going to require people to have a vote? The bill would say yes. So there's some real world problems with it in that fashion. Secondly, you know, we live in a representative democracy. And we have monuments that are owned by local subdivisions, political subdivisions, be they cities or parishes. And then we have elected representatives who govern those political subdivisions. And I don't know what role the state has to play in those decisions. And that's consistent with what I've been saying all along. In particular, and I don't believe, based on what I understand, that the bill, even if it made it all the way through, would be effective in time to address the situation in New Orleans in any way. But in New Orleans, for example, you've got city-owned monuments on city streets with a city council and mayor who decided to remove them. And that matter's been in both federal and state court. And the process that they went through has been approved. I don't know, typically you don't have the state coming behind and saying, well, we're going to interject ourselves in these matters and require elections and then do it in a way that would require election. For example, the master plan at LSU has the Troy Middleton Library being replaced. Well, he is a war hero from both World War I and II. You'd have to have an election somewhere called by somebody to be able to effectuate the master plan for LSU. And so there are just a lot of problems with the bill. I did watch last night the passion on the floor of the House of Representatives. I thought the bill unnecessarily created a lot of division and animosity. It's very sad. Having served in that body for 8 years, I have not seen anything like that. We need to come together as a people. That was not the way to do it.
Speaking of another divisive bill, what about the Sanctuary Cities bill? Should it come across your desk?
Well, I have some concerns with that bill as well, for many of the same reasons that I stated last year. And again, that bill, I don't even think it's come off the House floor yet. And so, I mean, it's not even halfway through the process. I mean,
Yeah.
so
It's moved over to the Senate.
no,
Okay.
it stayed on the House floor.
One last question.
Governor,
Yes, sir.
do you have any thoughts, putting the votes aside, do you have any personal thoughts
on whether these Confederate era monuments should or shouldn't be removed?
You know, one thing that I have said is that certainly those are historical figures, and there is a proper place for them. And what that proper place is will depend upon the will of the people, and they can make those decisions. One thing that I've said is that if those monuments are removed, they ought to be put somewhere in a historically accurate, factual setting, you know, appropriate setting, I guess I should say, like a museum, where they can be used to teach people. You know, one of the things that we should do is make sure that people understand, I think, a little bit better going forward, all of the sides of this issue. You know, we can do a good job of that. As somebody who studied an awful lot of history, I took every history elective that I could. When I went to West Point and I walked into the history department, it said, much of the history we teach was made by those we taught. And in fact, the 3 individuals whose monuments are at issue in New Orleans are all West Point graduates. But you know, this is a very difficult issue for a lot of people. I understand that the passion runs high, and while it is certainly a part of our history, can we say it's the best part? Can we say it's the best part? Thank you.
John?